Swyvers is a tabletop role-playing game designed by Luke Gearing and published through the Melsonian Arts Council. The game puts you in the shoes of a filthy, conniving, but enterprising and tenacious scoundrel in what might be described as low fantasy 1890s London. But not London per se. The city where you conduct all your criminal activities is colloquially known as the Smoke. Maybe due to all the industrial smog. The city's real name is up to you, but isn't of primary concern. In this video, I want to walk you through an advanced copy of the game. At the time of recording, the game is being crowdfunded. I'll leave a link below to where you can find it if you're interested in backing. The underlying structure of the mechanics, the evocative and colorful writing, and the artwork so far make this game a must-back for me personally, and I'll show you what I'm talking about in a minute. It's worth taking a moment to first discuss what creator Luke Gearing has done prior to this game, as well as what the Melsonian Arts Council is. Luke Gearing has written a ton of miscellaneous RPGs and supplements, but the ones you're most likely to have heard of are Gradient Descent and A Pound of Flesh for Mothership. He co-wrote those supplements with a number of other designers, and they won some awards for those. He also writes a satisfying blog that features RPG reviews and discussions. As far as the Melsonian Arts Council, I always thought it was an actual arts council that was publicly funded somewhere in England, but it's just a clever name. It's a small publishing operation founded by Daniel Sell. As the story goes, in June of 2014, he stumbled upon how to print and bind zines, so he started producing zines of his own, and that attracted creators who wanted their stuff printed as well. The company took off with Daniel's crowning achievement thus far, Troika, an acid fantasy OSR classic that is much a curious coffee table book as it is a functional RPG, and I mean that as a compliment. After the success of Troika, Daniel's operation expanded to 4 people, and you can tell from their catalog that they attract a lot of talented writers and artists in the RPG space. And that brings us to Swyvers, Luke Gearing's latest full game. I'll just read this bit on the first page. Swyvers is a game about bastards. You and your gang of criminals scarper through heists and sewers, stalk through the filth of the smoke, and if you're lucky, you'll make it out with a few extra shillings. The whole of this city is your filthy, sickly oyster. So yeah, in case you were wondering what a Swyver was, it's a scoundrel in this reimagined fantasy industrial revolution London. The art by David Hoskins is sparse in this preview document, but I love every last bit of it, and I can't wait to see more. And as for the word Swyvers, according to the author, it is derived from the Middle English term to swive, or to copulate, and by extension, a swyver is a copulator, but think in terms of F-bombs here. Your swyver is composed of 3 core attributes: constitution, dexterity, and strength, which tells you a lot about what you need to know as far as what PCs will be doing in this game. You have a 25% chance of being literate, and I love this, you as a player have 5 seconds to come up with how your PC is able to read if they are at all, and if you can't, then your PC is illiterate. You also start with 10 to 100 shillings, a ropey shank, aka crappy stabbing implement, and some orid rags. So a note on language before we continue. This game, in some of its early marketing, was billed as having Cockney elements. And that's a big detail because the writing and overall linguistic theme of the game is indeed steeped in the Cockney language traditions. I'm not exactly an expert at the Cockney accent myself. The accent does occasionally come up in the media that I've consumed over the years, and I've also watched a few videos about the Cockney accent, but that's it. I can tell you this, knowing a few ground rules about the accent will go a long way in enjoying both the reading of this game and the playing of it. Here are a few ground rules. The H is always dropped at the beginning of a word, so in the case of horrid rags, it's horrid rags. When there are any T's in the middle of a word, drop the T's. So instead of beating the nutters, it's beating the nutters. Oh, and that brings us to the third rule, drop the R at the end of every word. I believe this is called the rhotic R when it's pronounced, and you'll hear this in received or proper British pronunciation as well. Respect your betters might be something like respect your betters. Instead of pronouncing the TH at the beginning of a word, pronounce it like an F. Theoden would be Theoden. Theater would be theater. And when the TH is in the middle of a word, pronounce it as a V. Let's do this together might be something like, let's do this together. And don't pronounce the L at the end of words either. Those are replaced with an ow sound. Bell is bow. Doll is doll. And of course, drop the G at the end of any word ending in ing. Building is buildin, and swiving is swivin. It actually goes on into increasingly complex replacements, including things like using me instead of my, and the general selective diversion of proper grammar, and of course rhyming slang that is beyond the scope of this overly long sidebar. So anyways, back to the game. It contains so much fun slang, and if you're in the right headspace, it's just a joy to read. Well, if I'm being perfectly honest, I wasn't able to enjoy all the slang due to my ignorance. For example, under these 20 random traits you can assign to your character, they could be an utter melt / absolute tit. I don't know what that means. Or they got the morbs, which I assume means they're overly morbid and maybe taciturn. And then of course you get those entries that are very direct, such as the trait, the kind of bloke that'd cut your feet off and watch you hobble around for a bit before shoving you in the river, if you know what I mean. I mean, that's not great, but that's the best I can do for now. This game really doesn't want you to veer too far off the path of being a scoundrel, but thankfully, there are some parallel character archetype alternatives. You can play as a ruined knob. Ratman Exile surprised me because it's the first time we see that this setting contains a whole other humanoid species. But the game is very restrained in that you don't have a huge menagerie of different species. It's just humans and ratmen. And I find that kind of brilliant because I think the fewer humanoid species you have in a setting, the deeper and more meaningful they are. The opposite of this case being something like Forgotten Realms, where interspecies relations in society is virtually impossible to fathom realistically. When it comes to just humans and ratmen, this is a plausible and tantalizing world-building seed. Anyway, you can play as a rat man who has been exiled from their clan and has a bounty on their tail. Finally, there's a hedge swyver who is a sort of fish out of water in the city. If you needed just a little more of a preview of what you're expected to actually do in this game, these starter kits that you can choose from will make it pretty clear. Pickpocketing, burgling, conning, grave robbing. This is your lot. I don't very often get to brag about American weights and measurements as being superior to other countries, but in America, 100 cents equals $1, period. In much of England's history and in this fantasy English game, you have this. A pound is 20 shillings and represented by a capital L, of course, and 1 shilling mercifully represented by a lowercase s is 12 pence, and pence is notated with a lowercase d, so there are 240 pence to a pound. I like this description of Knob's frippery. There's a lot of voice in this game, and that gives it a lot of character. It's worth pointing out this list of proscribed goods because they can act as the heart of a very powerful inciting incident or plot hook or MacGuffin in a session. One thing that I found rather out of place in the gritty urban environment of the setting is armor, specifically medium and heavy armor. I just can't picture a party walking around wearing some of this stuff without attracting some very unwanted attention by the constables or guards or whatever. As far as weapons, they come in 3 categories: ropey, which is crappy, decent, and mint. You're largely going to see standard European fantasy fare in these lists. No firearms to speak of, at least not in any of your standard loadouts. The mechanics do try to take account of the amount of space you're fighting in when wielding some of those longer weapons. So you have this stipulation about half sorting, where some weapons can be used in tight quarters but at a reduced damage rating. It's really pretty crazy. There's a cheeky, cocky comment under almost every item listed in this game, which again occasionally leaves me scratching my head, like the dog's body you can hire here. Yeah, I had to look that one up. A dog's body is a person who does menial or unpleasant tasks that no one else wants to do. You can also have pets, and every time they survive a heist or job, they have a 1 in 3 chance of learning a trick. It's really any kind of trick you can think of that the animal could conceivably do, but here are some examples. It's kind of sad to think of a well-trained pet eventually dying in the course of your scumbag lifestyle, but dems the breaks. There's a surprising amount of attention put into different breeds of dogs, each with their own abilities. It's funny to think of a party whose members each have a dog. A bit of a nightmare with turn economy though. This is a really clever aspect of the game that I wasn't expecting. Your characters can put money away in a variety of investments that each have a cost, function, and potential income. And you can also own properties of different quality and pay to improve those properties in order to increase your monthly income. So you're not really just a street level scoundrel in this game, at least if you don't want to be. Once you've nicked a few pounds, you can put that money to work and even build a little bit of a slum empire. There are 2 kinds of roles in this game: a competing role, where you try to roll higher than another, and a skill roll or save, where you're trying to roll under a target number that is usually based on your attributes and sometimes just made up by the GM. Interestingly, the game suggests that you don't have to roll for these things, that they just happen automatically. These two in particular I thought were intriguing as actions with automatic successes. These two entries really change the entire nature of the game if you think about it. Your characters can always hide and always be stealthy and always notice hidden objects and details. So that begs the question, what do you roll on? And here's the answer. These are some examples of skills that you can incrementally improve. It really does come down to committing larceny in this game, and I love how it stays so focused on that. The actual dice mechanic is illustrated right here. Basically, you have 4 difficulty levels when it comes to skill checks and saves. The fewer dice you have to roll and add up, the higher the chance that you will come in at or under the target number and thus succeed. Remember that your 4 core attributes are determined by an initial 3d6 roll, so they can be anywhere from 3 to 18. You're going to want to roll at or under that stat with this amount of dice. And if you're not rolling against a core stat, you're rolling against an arbitrary target number, the scale of which is clearly denoted on this table. Fighting in this game has its own set of rules. To hit someone, you roll 2d10 and add your fighting skill to that sum. If you roll equal to or higher than the target's defense value, then you hit. If you roll 2 10s, you instantly kill the target. If the GM rolls 2 10s though, it's actually just treated as a normal hit. If you roll double 1s on your attack, you have to roll on this critical miss table, which is divided into melee and ranged attacks. To calculate damage, you roll the weapon's stated damage die. So for example, a shank has a d6 for damage, a sword has a d8, and a longsword a d10. Then the defender rolls armor if they have any, subtract the armor roll from the damage roll, and you end up with the resulting damage. As far as action economy goes, you get 1 full action or 2 half actions per turn. Those actions are all listed here. The game actually spells out a lot of the nitty-gritty edge cases in combat, including cover, charging, shield bashing, and stuff like that. It's worth noting that the condition or quality of your weapon, either ropey, decent, or mint, actually has a huge mechanical effect on the damage it can deal. Basically, with ropey, you roll disadvantage, and with mint, you roll advantage. When your PC hits 0 HP, you have to roll on this death and dismemberment table, which ranges from being knocked prone to losing all use of a limb to instant death. I'm not sure how I feel about the 18% chance of dying on the spot when hitting 0 HP. It's just a harsh game, I guess. At least that means you still have an 82% chance of surviving at 0. Healing is relatively fast and forgiving for the most part. If you don't get reduced to 0 HP, you recover all your HP after a full day's rest. And if you did drop to 0, then you recover half your HP. But it's a little more involved if you ended up breaking a bone somewhere. Here are some really gross diseases you can get. I really like the names of some of these. Duck mouth, beef sweats, Tom's face. Oh, there's actually one other way to instantly die in this game, and if you lose so many points in one attribute that it reaches 0. Some of these diseases do chip away at your core attributes. Also, I have never seen venereal diseases in an RPG before, but I have to say, I thought it was done pretty tastefully here. I mean, as far as one can be tasteful with STDs. Character advancement comes in the form of XP, which specifically comes from the sale of loot and the spending of money. You don't get XP from goods until they are actually sold to someone. You do get XP from a fee that is paid to you from completing a job. When you reach a new level, you get to pick from 2 of these 3 things. Probably the most entertaining way to spend your ill-gotten coin is through carousing, and you can earn up to 1,000 XP in one night if you carouse in a heaving district. And that's just a couple rolls of the dice if you have the pence for it. Unfortunately, the carousing consequences can be pretty rough. Well, they can range from rough to really good. You can catch an STD, lose a bunch of money, or end up in jail, or accidentally marry a noble, get a knife removed from your chest. Well, okay, most of these are bad. By the way, an NPC named Big Dave keeps coming up throughout this game, both in the tables and in the play examples. I don't know who Big Dave is supposed to be, but at this point, I'm really starting to like him. So you can spend some money and get a putterer, who is a protege who you can invest into by paying their room and board as well as training. They level up at a rate of 1 XP per 2 pence that you spend on their training, but you have to treat them well in-game or they could turn on you, maybe even try to kill you. But there are a couple of great tables that the GM rolls on when generating a new putterer, and they keep those rolls a secret. I keep coming back to this, but I just love secret GM tables like this. It's a great way to have fun with players when stuff like this is eventually revealed. Selling stolen goods is a whole thing in this game. You have to find an intermediary in any case, and then they will direct you to a potential buyer who ranges from someone who will pay you 20% of market value all the way up to 50% of market value. But there's also the occult buyers for magical items, I guess. In the worst case scenario there, it's a sting operation by the church and you have to deal with up to 20 watchmen. Long story short here, the city that is known as the Smoke can be composed of any districts mapped in any way that you want. While there are a few default features that you start with, every version of the city has to have a palace, a royal jail, a mayoral district, and a sprawling docks. But as you play the game, you're encouraged to come up with more details and more districts. I like this approach because it doesn't overwhelm the players or GM with a complex megacity at the get-go. And if the GM wants, they can include players in expanding the details of the city. There are tons of tables that give you ways to generate city details. This table here actually doubles as both a location generator and list of story seeds. You get a few pages of encounter ideas based on the socioeconomic level of the district, as well as some street name ideas. Here's a curious bit of Cockney humor. With this jobs table, you have a column denoting the quality of the job. At the very low end, you have bollocks, load of, i.e. a load of bollocks. But at the higher end, you have bollocks, the dogs, which is apparently a good thing. A dog's bollocks is way more desirable than just a load of generic bollocks. There are 3 full pages describing how bribes work in this game. Generally speaking, they range in price depending on the position of the person being bribed. One of the coolest and really most important aspects of the game from the GM's perspective is the detective. You don't necessarily need to include a detective in your game, but you're probably going to want one in a multi-session campaign. A person who has caught wind to your party's pattern of crimes and now acts as the game's main enemy. This detective is not intended to be a one-dimensional NPC either. The book provides a ton of ideas on how to make them pretty intensely interesting, most importantly through their 1 or 2 main motivations. The Miden is also a vitally important part of the game. It's the vast underbelly of the city, geographically. There are layers to it, and some of it extends underground below virtually every other district. You're not really supposed to map out the Miden in the course of play, but rather describe it and interact with it in bits and pieces as needed by the story. The bestiary section of this book was really fascinating to me, primarily because of the slang alternate names for each of the NPCs and monsters. Oh yeah, there are monsters in this game. I didn't realize that until I got to this page, but yeah. My guess is that you'd most likely find them in the deep Miden, where the city gives way to an eldritch, rotting fantasy dungeon. But these names, check this out. An animated corpse is called a shambling Harry, and a large creepy spider with attachment issues is called an Annie 8-Legs. These nicknames have a powerful suggestion to me. They imply that these creatures have been seen and interacted with before, and that they are almost commonplace. I don't quite know what to make of that, but it's an interesting implication in a setting that is otherwise just a dirty turn of the century London. Well, plus ratmen. And magic, as we'll see in a minute. Observers, which are these creatures with one eye that is always crying, is called a blinking Larry. That name makes them almost seem friendly, but they're not friendly. Here's a really rich deposit of Cockney slang for a watchman. Again, if you bother with this game at all, you'll really want to lean in on these kinds of terms. Casting magic in this game is brilliantly done through a game of blackjack. If you're not familiar, blackjack is a card game where you're dealt 2 cards initially, and you can ask for additional cards one at a time with the objective of reaching the sum of 21. Going over 21 is a bust. When casting a spell, it's the same idea. You get dealt 2 cards and you want to get as close to 21 as possible. In this case, you want to get between 17 and 21 in order to achieve the spell effect. Getting a blackjack or 21 is like a critically successful cast. Going over 21 is a critical failure that will most likely result in a loss of hit points, but in some horrible fashion. Magic is not really very benign in this game. You can almost think of it as all black magic or demonic magic, because you can actually enhance your spells with all kinds of creepy components. And if you really want power, you can ally yourself with one of 12 demonic entities. But that's not really so easy. For each of the 12, you have to do something truly horrible. It almost scares me how Luke Gearing even thought of some of these requirements. As for the spells themselves, they're relatively localized in nature, but in the context of being a street level criminal, they can be quite effective. You can prematurely age people, cause fear, make someone unseeable, gain super speed, lots of fun stuff. There are 20 or so spells listed in this preview document. I'm not sure if there will be more. Check out this spell to vomit yourself forth. The caster must first eat an entire adult human over 24 hours to cast this spell. Once cast, the caster will begin to painfully vomit a clone of themselves. Honestly, this stuff gives Robert Schwalb a run for his money. The last section of this document contains a sample scenario for you to run for your players. I don't want to spoil it, but it kills me not to reveal the basic premise of the scenario because it's so tongue-in-cheek and hilarious, but also dark and gritty. Alright, here are my thoughts on the preview of Swyvers by Luke Gearing via the Melsonian Arts Council. Roll high, roll under. I was a bit surprised to see the mix of rolling over and rolling under in the mechanics, rather than a unified approach. You want to roll high for competing rolls, but you want to roll low for skill checks and saves. But you also want to roll high for attack rolls. I guess you could get used to it, but it just doesn't seem immediately intuitive to me. I went ahead and asked Luke Gearing about this directly, and he told me that he doesn't like unified resolution systems, and that different things should feel different mechanically. Fair enough. Aside from that, I developed a sort of wish list for this game after reading the preview document. In the final version, I would have been thrilled to see the following, but I also got Luke's input on each. A pronunciation guide. Luke's response, not planned. A glossary, like a full explanation of all the terms along with the thesaurus function, might go a long way. Luke's response, it's all easy enough to work out with a Google search. More about the Ratmen. Like I mentioned, I really like how there are just humans and ratmen in the city. Even if there are more humanoid races in the final game, I'd love to know more about these ratmen. They are fertile ground for all kinds of cool setting backdrop details. Or in the alternative, and maybe even better, would be tables for generating the origin and societal structure of ratmen. Luke's response, there might be some ratmen details in a future module, but no plans for ratmen generator tables. He also mentioned that there are no plans for other major societal races besides the ratmen, and that really the humans are intended to be the main focus, which is something I really appreciated. As for the things I love about this game so far, laser focus on theme. I really appreciate how this book never takes its hands off the wheel when it comes to driving forward the theme and motifs. The premise is that you're a fantasy London scoundrel, and every last mechanic supports that premise. The investments, the dogs, the proteges, the buyers, the carousing, the detective, all of it just relentlessly enforces what this game is supposed to be about, and it never drops the ball once. Hilarious writing. I don't know what it is about Cockney slang and humor, but it just gets me every time. Mesmerizing artwork. The razor sharp ink illustrations by David Hoskins are epic. I would love to see more smaller illustrations sprinkled throughout the final book. His work is just electric. Implied and DIY setting. There are two aspects of the setting that I appreciate most. One is that so much of it is implied. The biggest example is the one I mentioned earlier, where the monsters each have a sort of casual slang nickname. At least in my head, the only way a creature has a nickname is if they've been encountered many times before by many people. That's a wild thing to consider. The other aspect of the setting that I admire is that so much of it is left to the GMs and players. You have tables for generating details, but the choice is yours. The common alternative to this approach, of course, is to have every last district of a sprawling megacity named, detailed, and mapped out for you. Those can be cool too, but it's usually a ton of reading for the GM, and unfortunately players end up never reading any of it. When a game has city detail generators like this one, the table can take ownership of the city they create, and that approach can lead to more memorable stories. That's all I've got for now. I've left links down below to where you can get a closer look at the project. Let me know if you're excited about this game. Thanks as always for watching. See ya.